What's the hardest thing about writing? Well, it's getting started. Maybe you're having a hard time coming up with a story idea, or you're stuck on where to take your story next. If you want a way into a story or a way through, I have 9 story starters to help you. This free PDF is full of story seeds and prompts to get you going. To download your 9 story starters, go to nancypanuccio.com/start. That's Nancy with an I, Panuccio with 2 C's, nancypanuccio.com/start. Age isn't just a number, it's how it manifests in the actions of the character. It's rooted in the way they see and approach a particular problem. It's the way they move through space. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and writing coach. And each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's begin. How do you flesh out your characters? How do you go deeper? Well, just as we don't know people in one pass, we can't know the people in our stories fully in our early drafts, including when the main character is us. For example, in memoir or autobiographical fiction, or any time we're basing characters on real people. The reader also comes to know the character more deeply over the course of the story. When a story works, both reader and writer seem to take the journey together. But we get to know our characters more and more deeply as we continue to write and revise. Now, Hemingway once said that when a writer knows enough about what he's writing about, he can omit things that he knows. And if the writer is writing true enough, the reader will have a feeling of those things as strongly as though the writer had stated them. But if a writer omits things because he doesn't know them, that only makes hollow places in his writing. So we don't start out knowing, yes, even when we're writing about ourselves. But we can mine our material or what we do know about a character to go deeper. We don't want any hollow places in our stories. We want to flesh out our characters. And there are 4 elements you can mine for deeper character development. These are the most overlooked elements writers often miss. So in this episode, I'm going to give you 4 ways to flesh out your characters that you may not have considered. Now, I've been taking workshops with the acting coach Ken Mathis, who says character is revelation, meaning that actors typically approach their acting as playing a character or playing a role rather than revealing character. And the same is true in writing. We don't want to write about characters. We want to reveal them. You're always revealing character. So in this episode, we'll talk about 4 ways to go deeper into your characters and create a richer experience for you as the author and for your readers. So let's get right to it. Number 1, setting. Now, I know that setting is something we take for granted. It's writing 101. And I can hear some of you saying, I already know this. However, Sometimes writers will just put setting in for the sake of having a place for their characters to engage in the action without considering how place and character are intertwined. Sometimes there's not enough setting, and most often, setting is separate from the character. Setting is intimately tied to your character. There's historical context, there's political context, and social context. Now, the setting may be the cause of external challenges that your character is facing. I think of Cheryl Strayed's memoir, Wild. The Pacific Crest Trail posed challenge after challenge. Or maybe the setting just exacerbates the challenges. For example, Revolutionary Road takes place in the mid-1950s at the height of the American dream. Now, the main setting is Connecticut in the suburbs. And this setting, this social construct that the two main characters find themselves in, exacerbates the problems in their marriage. Now, there's exterior setting and interior setting. Here's a great example from Frances Wong's story, Garden City. In the first few sentences, she immediately places us in the story's setting. But it's not just ornamental. It's not just mere setting for the sake of setting. Here's how she starts. No one wanted to rent the Chen's apartment. It sat vacant for 3 months, collecting dust and heat. Footsteps now and then echoed along the wood floors. Voices came and went. Sometimes the drone of a fly butting itself against glass. Eventually, the fly, its legs as thin as eyelashes, dried on the kitchen windowsill. Okay, this is powerful. It's just a few sentences, but it gives us a sense of this emotional temperature that we're going to encounter. There's a vacant apartment. It's collecting dust and heat. There's a dead fly on the kitchen windowsill. When Mr. Chen opened the door in August, he felt the apartment's hot breath as he entered. So it's suffocating, it's dusty, worn down, neglected. A potential tenant comes. He calls her the Christian lady, and he tries to sell her on the apartment. He tells her that garbage and electricity is paid for, and then he tells her about the garden, which he believes is the big selling point. And his wife tells him that the apartment has been the biggest mistake of their lives. So clearly, this is putting a lot of stress on their marriage. But then the story moves back in time when he and his wife first saw the garden. When Mr. Chen thought about it carefully, he was convinced that he had been fooled into buying the apartment. He blamed it on the garden, a conservatory pungent with the smell of overripe flowers that conjoined the lobby. 8 years earlier, he and Mrs. Chen had been beguiled by the magenta-speckled lilies as they sat together on one of the wooden benches. Mr. Chen had gotten out of his seat once or twice, pacing the garden in an excited manner. "Who wouldn't want to live here?" he said in Chinese to his wife. Mrs. Chen knew that her husband was naive, that he had a habit of promising things he couldn't deliver. Sitting in the garden, however, Mrs. Chen was distracted by the huge lavender peonies that looked clear and delicate as watercolors. She couldn't help but be lulled by the fragrances wafting beneath her tingling nose as she listened to her husband's boastful talk, all his plans for them and their son. She could not deny that the garden was a beautiful thing. In the end, she agreed that they should invest their savings in the apartment. Okay, we already know from the opening that the apartment was a bad investment. We also know that this is causing friction in the marriage. And then we go deeper. 8 years had gone by, and their son was now dead. Whenever Mrs. Chen saw the garden, she felt a bitterness rise up to her mouth. The smell of lilies reminded her of funerals now. Their rich, exhausting perfume made her want to claw at her throat. The transplanted flowers were crowded too close together, and their transparent petals gave off a ghostly luster. This was not a living garden, Mrs. Chen decided, not a place where things came back. Okay, so we're getting this stark contrast between the idealism that they had in the beginning and where they find themselves now. So there's this death of idealism, squashed dreams, and all of this is embodied in the details of setting. There's also the specter of their son who died. We don't get the details about that. We just know that they're on the bare stage of that absence. The apartment in the present reflects that emptiness. No one wanted to live there. It sat vacant for 3 months, collecting dust and heat. The garden, which had been the main selling point, now reminds Mrs. Chen of funerals. It's not a living garden, not a place where things come back. It also shows the contrast between Mr. Chen and Mrs. Chen. They have different experiences of the garden and the apartment. They have different perspectives, but both are living in this emptiness. They think the issue is the apartment. They believe the apartment has ruined their lives and their marriage. But I would say the apartment in the present, the one that no one wants to live in, is a reflection of the grief that they're grappling with, the grief that they're repressing. Now, this story centers on the problem of renting the apartment. They do find someone to rent it, but she defaults on the rent almost as soon as she moves in. They don't focus on the death of their son, but that is still permeating through the description of the apartment. It's imbued through the setting. Do we need to be told that the Chens are struggling financially? Do we need to be told they're desperate, that there's a sense of emptiness in their marriage, that there's grief? No. All of that is imbued in the setting in which they engage. The empty apartment. There's a multiplicity of emotions embedded at once. It's how they view the environment they find themselves stuck in. It's in their relationship to the setting. So you want to mine your setting for metaphoric value. It's an indirect and a very powerful way to deepen our relationship to your character. It's a great way for you to deepen your relationship with your character. Character is revelation. Okay, on to number 2, your character's age. Sometimes writers are very direct. They'll write something like, Jordan, 77 years old, lived in an A-frame house. But it's far more interesting and dramatic to suggest a character's age rather than directly state the number, because that's just information. The reader doesn't get to participate in that, and it's not dramatic. Instead, you want to embed your character's age in the action of the scene. Here's a great example from Muriel Sparks' novel, Memento Mori. Could she make tea herself? Yes, she would try. The kettle was heavy as she held it under the tap. It was heavier still when it was half filled with water. It rocked in her hand, and her skinny, large, freckled wrist ached and wobbled with the strain. At last, she had lifted the kettle safely onto the gas ring. She had seen Mrs. Anthony use the automatic lighter. She tried it, but she could not make it work. Matches. At last, the gas was lit under the kettle. Charmaine put the teapot on the stove to warm. She then sat down in Mrs. Anthony's chair to wait for the kettle to boil. She felt strong and fearless. Okay, notice she's rooted in the problem. She wants to make a pot of tea. How old do you think she is? We don't need to know the facts. We know she's elderly. It requires monumental effort to do this one simple thing, an effort that makes her feel strong and fearless. Now, the author never steps in to tell us her age. It's all done through the lived experience of the character. So here, making a pot of tea is a challenge for this woman. Her skinny, large, freckled wrist ached and wobbled with the strain. She had to sit down after the gas was lit under the kettle. So the author doesn't have to tell us her age. It's in the accrual of details in the lived experience of the character. Now, does this mean you never tell us a character's age? No, of course you can. But don't stop there. Demonstrate it. Here's an example from Rosalind Brown's novel, Before and After. The little boy's smile is so wide, sun in his eyes, that he seems to be crying. He is fair-haired, not quite blonde, or it's the white light that douses his head and shoulders with pallor. Suddenly, he flings his arms up, straight up, and catches a bar in his hands. He is 6 or 7, tall enough to catch the bar and hoist himself up and over, swinging like one of those little wooden monkeys who leap between two squeezed sticks and flip over and plummet down in a single fluid curve, the kind no battery needed that will repeat the trick without complaint as often as he is squeezed. But after 2 assaults on the bar, the boy stands in the scuffed dirt, direct before the camera, spreads his arms wide, grinning wildly, then clamps his arms around himself, hugging hard, his hands squeezing so tight you'd think it would hurt. He holds himself in a delighted embrace, his eyes a little crazed on purpose, as if to say, "See me, I'll do anything." He is beaming. Okay, so pay attention to how you assess the people around you. When you first encounter someone, you make a multitude of instant calculations. Sure, there are physical details that clue us into a person's age, but you want to go beyond the physical. Look for the indirect clues. What are they wearing? How do they move? Are they agile? Are they spry? Age isn't just a number. It's how it manifests in the actions of the character. It's rooted in the way they see and approach a particular problem. It's the way they move through space. So number 2, age. Okay, on to number 3, work. How do your characters earn money? Now, sometimes writers give their character a job just for the sake of giving the reader some pedigree of reality. But you always want to ask, how can I use this? Everything in your story should be connected to everything else in your story, and every character makes money somehow. Now, work can be in the foreground. It could also be in the background. It could be part of your character's story problem or just an aside. It's a great way to harvest details of language, of point of view, of socioeconomic status, of setting, A person with money will have different circumstances than someone with no money or not enough money. Now, a character may not be old enough to work. Maybe mom is a stay-at-home mom, still an occupation, just unpaid. And maybe dad is an insurance salesman. Maybe your main character is an accountant or a loan shark. Maybe your character's parents have those occupations. It's not that you have to broadcast what they do or spend a lot of narrative space on it. It doesn't have to have a major presence on your story. And maybe your character doesn't even need to work. And that says something about class. You're always writing about class, whether you're conscious of it or not. So, is he or she a biologist, a doctor, a lawyer? What kind of doctor? What area of law? Is she an English teacher? Is he a journalist? Does she sell movie tickets at the multiplex? So much of our identity is tied up with how we earn a living. For example, in the novel The Mars Room, Romy was a stripper before she became a convict. The story takes place in prison, where she's serving 2 life sentences, but what she did for money was key to what put her behind bars. It's in the background, and it's essential to the plot. Now, you may have inside information into a particular profession or job, and you may want to use that in your story if it's relevant. But maybe your character has a job that you've never held. Either way, you can do research. A great resource is the book Working by Stud Terkel. He interviewed people across all industries, every job and profession you can imagine, from the prestigious to the artistic to the menial. For example, he interviewed a receptionist at a large business establishment in the Midwest. At the time of the interview, she's 24. Her husband is a student. And she says, I was out of college, an English lit major. I looked around for copywriting jobs. The people they wanted had majored in journalism. Okay, the first myth that blew up in my face is that a college education will get you a job. And then she talks about the experience of being a receptionist. I changed my opinion of receptionist because now I am one. It wasn't the dumb broad at the front desk who took telephone messages. She had to be something else because I thought I was something else. I was fine until there was a press party. We were having a fairly intelligent conversation. Then they asked me what I did. When I told them, they turned around to find other people with name tags. I wasn't worth bothering with. I wasn't being rejected because of what I had said or the way I talked, but simply because of my function. After that, I tried to make up other names for what I did. Communications control, servo mechanism. I don't think they'd ever hire a male receptionist. They'd have to pay him more for one thing. You can't pay someone who does what I do very much. It isn't economically feasible. You're there just to filter people and filter telephone calls. You're there just to handle the equipment. You're treated like a piece of equipment, like the telephone. So, great insight. These are real people talking about the jobs that they've held. Again, the book is called Working. It's written by Stud Terkel. I'll link in the show notes. Now, work may or may not be a big part of your story, but it's still worth giving thought to. Not just what your character does for a living, but how he or she feels about it. In the novel Revolutionary Road, work and the security that comes from work is central to the plot. The protagonist, Frank, has to negotiate his desire to leave his boring job and move his family to Paris, or stick with the stability his job provides. That's the inner conflict. Okay, let's move on to number 4, small details. Life is in the details. It's in the smallest things. Remember, everything is an expression of character. It's what they wear. It's what objects they surround themselves with. It's always deepening the reader's experience of the story. Now, often writers will use shorthand to tell us about a character. They'll tell us how they feel without giving us the proof. But you want to be reticent about a character's feelings and precise about the things in his or her orbit. Carefully chosen details are what make up a character. It's those small, precise things. For example, in Bernard Malamute's story, Still Life, he describes Anna Maria. She's a painter living in Rome, and he's an American artist renting studio space from her. Here's how he describes her the first time he encounters her. The Patrici, a thin, almost gaunt, high-voiced, restless type with short, black, uncombed hair, violet mouth, distracted eyes, and tense neck, a woman with narrow buttocks and piercing breasts, was in her way attractive, if not in truth beautiful. She had on a thick black woolen sweater, eroded black velveteen culottes, black socks, and leather sandals spotted with drops of paint. Listen to those details. So precise. Not just short black hair, short black uncombed hair, not just black pants, not just even culottes, eroded black velveteen culottes, not just sandals, sandals spotted with drops of paint. So we get an image. We get a picture of her. Now, Anna Maria is the antagonist in this story. The main character is attracted to her, but notice she's not what one would typically describe as attractive. Now, can you imagine if he described her as your typical male fantasy? That would be kind of boring. It would be something we'd expect. I mean, she's a bit ornery. She has short, uncombed hair. She's strange in an interesting way. She stands out. She's not what we would expect when one talks about someone who's attractive or beautiful, and this tells us something essential about our main character. She commands our attention. Here's another great example, and this is from Anna Karenina. So after a trip to Moscow, where Anna tries to repair her brother's broken marriage, and more significantly, where she meets Vronsky, her future lover, she returns to St. Petersburg, and her husband meets her at the train station. And this is how she describes him. Why do his ears look like that? She thought, looking at his frigid, imposing figure, and especially the ear that struck her at that moment as propping up the brim of his round hat. Okay, that's such a small detail. The thing she noticed at that moment was his ear, which seemed to prop up the brim of his round hat. So we see him as a cold, stern man, and I think vulnerable in this moment. But we feel her feelings of almost contempt as she becomes aware of her feelings toward him, as though she's seeing him for the first time, which in many ways she is. She's changed. She's just met Vronsky. She's been away. And so her husband looks different. And by the way, this is what we mean by point of view. We're getting an image of her husband filtered through her new reality. She's just met Vronsky, she's infatuated, and the details she notices about her husband is selective to reflect how she feels about him now. But let's go back to setting. Remember the small, precise details from our first example? The fly butting up against the windowsill, the lilies in the garden. Small, specific details. Here's another example of setting, that uses small details, very precise details. In Suzanne Burney's novel, A Crime in the Neighborhood, she doesn't just tell us Spring Hill is an ordinary neighborhood. She brings in specific details to demonstrate it. She describes subdivisions where brick split levels and two-car garages had been planted like cabbages on squares of quiet green lawn. She talks about the Schwinn bicycles that were occasionally stolen. Very specific, not just bicycle, Schwinn bicycle. Then once that ordinariness is disrupted by the murder of a young boy in the neighborhood, we get very different details. We get the broken bottles, locust husks, and tangled creeper vines on the shaded half of the hillside. Small, precise details. Now, for more on details, listen to episode 81, Story Details, What to Leave In, What to Leave Out. Episode 81, I'll link in the show notes. Now, all of this comes from observation. You want to look for the smallest details that tune you into a person or place or situation, things that you find interesting or quirky or original or moving. Capture things on your notes app or in a journal or a notebook. I love pen and paper, but I don't always have that handy. So the Notes app on my phone works great. Okay, so to recap, here are the 4 things to explore for deeper character development. Number 1, setting. Number 2, your character's age. Number 3, work. And number 4, small details. The whole point is to allow the reader to inhabit your character's lived experience. Now, these aren't ways to necessarily conceive characters from scratch. These are when you've already written your story or you're in the process of writing it and you want to go deeper. You never want to write about a character or tell us about your character. You want to recreate their experience. Georgia O'Keeffe once said, "I know I cannot paint a flower, but maybe in terms of paint color, I can convey to you my experience of the flower or the experience that makes the flower of significance to me at this particular time." So live in the experience of your character. Don't just give us information. Don't just give us the external events. Remember, character is revelation. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And if you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform and please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.